And coming up next, we've got the man of mystery, known only as Z, hailing from Lithuania, but now hiding in Atlanta, America, or Atlanta, I think is how it's pronounced, Z. Z, please tell us what you know.
Thank you for introducing me. My name is Žilvinas, but everyone calls me Z because that's easier, and I'm fine with it. Yes, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and currently I'm running a Foundation for Economic Education, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, think tank in the United States, or maybe perhaps even the world. We were started in 1946, and my tagline is, we lasted 75 years, we outlived Soviet Union. And just to illustrate how old we are, I think we had Ludwig von Mises as one of our employees back in the day. So FI is a very old organization. I have been in the liberty movement since 2006, working in Lithuania for Lithuanian Free Market Institute. So I would say I've been fighting professionally for liberty for about 14, 15 years, and probably I think I'm going to continue that professional fight till I actually die. So I think it's fair to say that these days are kind of very interesting for liberty, and perhaps not all the emotions that people get are positive. Put it bluntly, I think very many people, libertarians included, are very worried about what's happening in the world. And I have a couple of remarks on that. Well, first of all, I think remember that liberty is a very recent phenomenon. I'm not talking decades, but if you look centuries or even millennia or eons, look at the human history. The level of freedom that people have right now is unprecedented. So I hate the simplistic views of history, but if I could offer one, so the entire human existence, the entire human history, the entire human progress was actually a human being liberating himself from authority. And I speak authority, it can be the state, it can be it could be your tribal leader, or even the biggest primate in your pack. I think if we looked at history, we would actually notice that people started with lack of liberty, where they're governed by, first they were governed by those who were stronger, meaning the big bruter, the ape man with a bigger stick. Then they were governed and their lives were owned by the chieftains, then by the states, then by empires. And the level of freedom we have right now is very large, it's very recent. So no wonder there are a lot of people that actually are unhappy about it. And there are lots of people who want to enslave humans again. Maybe not literal enslavement, but telling people what to do, telling people what to think, telling people how to behave, telling people how to work and what to do with the money that those people earn. So I would say, Marx saw it as a class struggle. I don't like his idea of history, but I think that you could see the whole history of humankind as a kind of a freedom struggle. So the reason why I'm saying that, the stakes are very high, the fight is very important, and it is here. So because this is so important, because the stakes are so high, so no wonder that the battle sometimes gets ugly, but that is a fight, and that's a fight we're in. But if we're talking about fighting, if I may use another analogy from human anatomy, and I think of fighting, I always get an adrenaline kick. I always get this rush. This is really important. And that's how humans think. It's a fight or flight response. Do you jump into the middle of a battle? Do you jump into the fight, or do you run away and retreat? And I think we, to some extent, are actually facing this. What would be flight in this, or what would be a retreat in this situation? Well, I would say isolation, retreat to your ideological safe place, retreat to your ideological bunker, talk to people who only believe what you think. That, I think, is an option, but I don't think it's a valid one. I am not the one who's going to retreat from the fight. I don't want this to leave this world to the left and the enemies of freedom. So I choose to fight. And my option, my choice in life is not just to fight, but it is to win. So I don't want just a sacrifice or a beautiful suicide. I actually want to fight to win. So when we're talking fighting and we're talking winning, Sun Tzu is kind of overrated, but at the same time, he said many smart things, I think, which we could learn from him. So one thing is Sun Tzu says is pick your battles. And I think this is important if we're talking in terms of strategy, if we're talking what needs to be done. I think we as libertarians, or we as people who associate with freedom, we need to understand that perhaps not every single battle can be won, and perhaps not every single battle must be fought. And his other advice is avoid what is strong, attack what is weak. And I think this is precisely what the other side of the ideological debate is doing. The left is not attacking material prosperity of capitalism. The left is not attacking the freedom that people get in free society. The left is nitpicking very small little things, and they say, sure, material prosperity is great. Sure, the fact that everyone has a car is wonderful, but couldn't it be a little better? Couldn't this car be a little more comfortable, a little cheaper, a little less polluting, a little more environmentally friendly? I mean, all of the thing that the past 10 or 15 years, in fact, maybe everything after the 90s and the fall of Soviet Union, all that we've seen, it's been the left kind of saying, going after the weak spots of capitalism, not denying capitalism per se, but saying they could do a better job than capitalists or than freedom-loving people. And I think this is something to learn from them. Now, I think sometimes when we try to convert people, when we try to persuade people to come to our side, we want to dismantle their worldview. We want to hit them on the head with a book and say, look, everything that you believed in is wrong. This is the right way. Now, it doesn't work that way. Think about yourself. What would it take for you to abandon liberty? What kind of knowledge, evidence, data, and repeated iterations, repeated talks would it take to you to actually stop thinking that liberty is the greatest thing ever? So obviously we'd say that's a lot, but that's exactly the same point when we're talking to people who are unlike us. If we're trying to persuade people to come to our side, we need to acknowledge how much we have to do, how much we have to persuade them, and most importantly, how much do we have to understand why they're thinking what they're thinking. I would say only a very small portion of people, 5 perhaps to 10% or even less, think in categories and terms that we think in, like liberty, coercion, voluntary cooperation, anything peaceful. For most people, that's foreign jargon. They do not understand it. And this is where another advice of knowing your terrain of the battle or knowing your audience of the battle comes in. We at FEE right now are going after the young audiences, which we call the 16 to 22-year-olds, and this is our strategic goal. Meaning, of course, we care about people of liberty of all ages, but our strategic goal right now is 16 to 22-year-olds. How do we know that what 16 to 22-year-olds care about? Well, we just had a recent large market survey and research, I think, on which we spent about $2 million to actually figure out what young audiences care about. And you know what? They don't care about the same things that we do. A simple example, we tested a bunch of slogans with them. So the slogan, I think that you and me and everyone who's listening would agree, taxation is theft. Can you guess what portion of young people agree with that? Less than 8%. Even more importantly, even though half of young people agree with the slogan that don't hurt other people, don't take their stuff, of these half people, less than 8% agree with taxation is theft. What I'm trying to say is, if we're here if not just to fight, but if we're here to win, we really need to know the people that we're talking to and how we're talking to. So that would be my sort of second advice. Another thing that I think we need to do is we need to show to people that liberty not only works, or capitalism not only works, but it's also just. Ironically, I think the left is bashing us on the head with that argument right now, and we're failing. I mean, we can show the negative effects to GDP growth of high taxation. We can show that redistribution doesn't achieve what it's trying to do, and that's all good. I think we as libertarians, as logical people, we have tons of arguments and thousands of books of why liberty works. But I think what we really need to develop, or at least what we really need to talk to people about, it's not that liberty just works, that liberty is the most just, the best way for people to live together. If we want to get technical, I would call it beyond utilitarian. We need to go beyond that and to prove that liberty works. And that's not easy. I mean, we need, not only do we need data, not only do we need research, we need anecdotes, stories, movies, videos, images. And our videos need to be, and images need to be better, and we have to have more of them than the other side. Because if you look how most people form their worldviews, that's coming from what they consume in the media and education. And currently, there's a torrent of content which is against free market, which is against what we feel, against liberty, against things that we fight for. So if we have to stand a chance, we need to create all these proof points of these anecdotes, these stories. That's a lot of work, but that's the only way. That's the only way to do it. Our current goal at Foundation for Economic Education is by 2024 have regular interactions with 4 million young people of ages 16 to 22. Why 4 million? Because that's 10% of that demographic population. If we do that, I think we stand a chance. Anything less, perhaps we're not even in a conversation. Finally, look at this way. In management theory, there is a saying that you can motivate the optimists by prospect of success, but if a person is a pessimist, you can motivate him by the fear of failure. So think of it like this: what would happen if we would fail, or what is at stake? I think the whole future of the world is at stake. And I'm not trying to be melodramatic. I'm not trying to be megalomaniac, but it is what it is. I guess you could, 50 years ago, you could say, well, if Europe goes to communism, we can all move to the United States. Well, that's probably look at what's happening in the United States. If the United States turn left, there'll be nowhere to go. Sure, we can fantasize about Switzerland or Monaco or Estonia, but I think retreat is not really an option. So it is hard. It is difficult. Perhaps we're seeing things that we thought are long gone. I myself, I grew up in Soviet Union. I saw hammers and sickles. And of course I saw them being melted for scrap metal. I never thought I'm going to see hammers and sickles here in the United States. But then again, these are the days we're living in. So it is hard. But I would say what should motivate you, what motivates me, is what's at stake. The price of our success is the future of the world. And once again, the failure will have nowhere to go. So it is hard, it is difficult, but it is supposed to be hard and difficult because of the level of fight that we are in. So if you're motivated by success, think of the great world that we could create if free market ideas win. If you're motivated by failure, think how awful it will be if we don't do our job right. But I think this is right now the time to fight. This is not the time to retreat. This is the time to put our message forward and actually persuade people that we are right. Because we know we are right. Logic is with us. So let's take that logic, put persuasive materials on it, put our preaching hats on, and actually persuade other people who don't believe like us. Let's persuade people who have different ideas than us that our ideas are actually better. I think we can do that. I know it's going to take a lot of work, but I think we will succeed in the end. But it will be hard, it will be difficult, but the price is worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, Z. That's great stuff and very true, very powerful stuff. We're going to move straight along now to our last speaker and one of the most popular speakers we've ever had at a Friedman conference, Miriam Issa. Now, Miriam, as our last speaker, there's no pressure, but the entire success of this conference rests on whatever you're about to say next. Knowing this, she did want us to, keep expectations in check. And she pointed out before this started that she's actually prepared literally the best speech that has ever been prepared. And so we're really looking forward to hearing that. Please educate us, Miriam.
Thanks, Miriam.
I'm going to need so much alcohol once this is over. All right. Hey, folks, it's me, Miriam Issa, that social justice warrior from LA that keeps infiltrating your libertarian conferences. It is such an honor to be here again. Now, I am here because I have a very important public service announcement to deliver to you about a trend gaining traction in progressive circles, one that threatens to undermine liberty and its defenders, ergo you. And here goes. Ladies and gentlemen, the Karens have infiltrated the left. I repeat, the Karens of the world have infiltrated the left. If you or someone you know has had their freedom of expression revoked by a Karen, please call your local libertarian chapter because they might be the only people equipped to fight this growing trend. Now, if you're confused and maybe you just haven't been on the internet in a few years and you're wondering why we are picking on women named Karen, allow me to explain. You see, Karen is the internet's favorite meme, and it is also the left's favorite villain. We all know a Karen. She's that mildly racist white woman who always wants to speak to the manager. Now, the left has accurately been griping about the Karens of the world for quite some time. For example, when Central Park Karen threatens to call the police on you because she doesn't want to put her dog on a leash, especially if it's a black man requesting it. And by the way, this is literally based on a true story that happened several weeks ago when a black gentleman saw a woman walking her dog in New York City's Central Park in an area where you were mandated to keep your dog on a leash. And this black gentleman politely asked this woman to abide by the park rules. And in turn, she called the police on him, claiming that he was threatening her. And I quote, "An African-American man is threatening me." Yes, when the Karens behave in this kind of deplorable way, it should be immediately called out. And it was. Now, the problem is that the Karens, who have historically mostly resided on the far right side of the ideological spectrum, have, in an unprecedented plot twist, infiltrated the left. And this time, Karen is wielding her finger-wagging ways not to complain to the manager about something asinine. No, that's very 2019. This time, she is here to erode what was once the most ardently defended value held by progressives, the freedom of expression. And if this trend continues and members of the far right and the far left succeed in normalizing censorship, then those of us who truly value our civil liberties will increasingly become ideologically homeless. Now let's talk a little bit more about this woman named Karen. Karen 2.0 is to the old Karen what the new iPhone 11 is to the old iPhone 6. It's better, it's bigger, it's louder, it has even more buttons to push, but ultimately, it's the same thing. Karen 2.0, or as I like to call her on the left, white ally Karen, currently spends her time shaming her fellow allies for such crimes as not being woke enough fast enough, or for not using the most politically correct verbiage on an otherwise well-intentioned Instagram post. She has declared herself to be the internet police, and in doing so, she's actually perpetuating everything she claims to stand against, which means that white ally Karen is just as out of touch with reality as her equally annoying predecessors. Case in point, America is in the midst of arguably one of the biggest civil rights movements in our nation's history, a civil rights movement whose very goal is to end state-sanctioned over-policing. And yet, during this pivotal moment, as white ally Karen denounces aggressive policing, she herself aggressively polices her fellow progressives. To put her inconsistency and hypocrisy in perspective, consider that systemic racism has been keeping a knee on the neck of Black men and women in America not for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, no, for centuries, perpetuating a cycle of poverty that undoubtedly leads to a cycle of violence. Black men in the US are literally being gunned down in 2020 for the crime of jogging while Black. And instead of us progressives uniting to fight actual white supremacy, we are instead tearing each other down, shaming our fellow anti-racist allies for the most inconsequential missteps. People are dying as a result of police brutality, and yet white ally Karen is more concerned with taking down a member of her own tribe for, say, referring to the 1918 influenza as the Spanish flu, because according to her, calling it the Spanish flu is an act of micro-racial aggression against Spaniards, and therefore inherently violent, and therefore not a safe space. Now, Karen, if you're listening, the only space on the internet that is safe is Amazon Prime's return policy. It is indeed excellent, and it makes me feel very safe, but about shopping. And that is it. The most disappointing part of all of this is that white ally Karen means well. She is a self-identified progressive who doesn't realize that her blind spots are getting in the way of the very progress she is trying to build. She views herself as a soldier fighting for racial equality, and that is a noble goal. But in reality, she revels in finding an outgroup to assert her superiority over. Ironically, she's actually a lot like the very ancestors that she tries so hard to distance herself from. White ally Karen also views herself as fighting for freedom of expression, except that in reality, she will only defend the expressions which match her own. And if one dares to dissent, to question, to consider nuance, an endangered species these days, right up there with snow leopards and, airlines that don't charge for carry-on luggage. If one dares to consider nuance in complex moral issues, Karen will show you the full fury of her wrath. She will not stop until she has turned the internet and your employers against you. She isn't against cancel culture. She is cancel culture. And she, in my opinion, is liberty's biggest foe. Sure, bad laws that stifle our freedoms must be fixed, but bad laws don't write themselves. Bad laws are the fruit of bad players and bad movements. And this rampant culture of canceling out our dissenters is a very bad movement. And white ally Karen is leading the charge. Little does she know that cancel culture will eventually take her out too, because no one is immune. Now, while the left continues to assassinate its own soldiers without realizing that soon they won't have any allies left, let me point out, blind spots are not unique to the left, and they are not unique to the right. We have them too. And we won't be able to convince anyone to see their own if we are not first willing to take an earnest look at our own. Just think back to 1 year ago when I had one of the greatest honors of my life to be able to speak at this conference. And you might have forgotten that some of the very people who might possibly be watching this broadcast were the same people who were posting not so flattering comments about me based solely on my picture and my bio, condemning me before I had a chance to speak. While I support your right to express those opinions, if we here are to hold ourselves to a high bar, if we are to be good members of civil society, then even we should look out for one another and monitor ourselves when even we are quick to rush to judgment without looking at all the facts. Here's another example of the blind spot of censorship by people who claim to be against it. My mother is a conservative, white Cuban refugee who was politically persecuted by a communist regime until the US offered her asylum. My mother will not hear anything that Black Lives Matter has to say on racism until BLM denounces their dangerous communist blind spots. Valid. Meanwhile, BLM refuses to reconsider their stances on brutal communist dictatorships until all white people, my mother included, address their role in systemic racism. So as a Cuban American, and also as a strong Black ally, it breaks my heart to see two aggrieved communities who can't seem to hear each other out. No one will put down their weapon because they are too enraged with the other person's blind spot to take a humble look at their own. When in reality, these two communities stand to gain way more if they just work together. To be clear, Black people in the US are about 14% and Cubans are less than 4%. Neither of them are the gatekeepers. They should really listen to each other. We benefit from cross-pollinating. Like when Jews and Blacks formed an alliance in the US during the 1960s civil rights movement. Two persecuted minorities were working together to end Jim Crow segregation. Or take in the 1980s when gay and trans people stopped fighting each other and instead joined forces to fight the AIDS epidemic. That is how you move mountains, focusing on where you align and also allowing space for where you diverge, not canceling each other out, because imperfectly united is way better than perfectly divided. We all here must continue to examine our values and our actions regarding those values. We have to make sure that they are in harmony so that we do not undermine our very own progress. The left makes mistakes a lot, and so does the right, and so do we. Even Thomas Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal," while owning and sleeping with 14-year-old slaves. Or take this example of a Hollywood blind spot. Today, virtually every notable member of Hollywood looks shamefully upon our not-so-distant past when Hollywood routinely blacklisted artists suspected of communist leanings. It was known as the Hollywood Red Scare, and it ended the careers and the income of not just actors, but screenwriters, directors, and other talented filmmakers, because studios did not agree with these people's political beliefs. Countless artists were barred from work on the basis of their membership, their alleged membership, or even just their sympathy for a certain ideology. Now, we all in Hollywood agree on how discriminatory this practice was. And yet we're all doing it now. Look, personally, I don't like a MAGA hat either, but I will defend your right to wear one. And if wearing one on set will get you fired, then history is just repeating itself and claiming new victims. And it will be our grandchildren who will say, "People were fired for their political beliefs? How shameful." Shameful indeed. The more we cancel out and divided we fall and get conquered. As history repeats itself, our only real weapon is to defend the future of liberty by holding each other and ourselves accountable to what we claim to value. And if we believe in freedom of expression, then we must defend the rights of everyone to express themselves freely, even as we wholeheartedly disagree with so much of the content of their beliefs. I will end with a quote by Thomas Jefferson. He also said, "I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery." So clearly, Thomas Jefferson was a libertarian. Liberty does not operate with a double standard, and in order to defend her, then neither can we. Thank you.